Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And here at Storied Arcs, we do deep dives into completed story arcs, typically from indie and creator-owned comics. This is the first great exception, although I feel like even still it has an asterisk. Like,
yeah, because when you think of major publishers, the unspoken part of that is superhero comics. You know, right, you're
capes.
Thinking, right. You're thinking capes and cows. You're thinking superhero. You're thinking connected universe,
and you're thinking really the big writers for those places. You know, like Chris Claremont or someone.
Yeah.
Mark Russell is not a huge writer. I would still very much consider him an indie comic writer, even if he has one contract with DC Hanna-Barbera.
He has the indie comic mindset. I think he brings that to his for hire work for either DC or Marvel, because they're not going to be throwing him some big ongoing anything he does. We talked about is a short limited run, because he has a different perspective than I think most mainstream comic writers, and so it's a nice curveball. It's a nice change of pace when he gets on a title for, let's say, like a one shot or a limited series or something like that. But he's not someone that like you're going to give, maybe I don't know term, but he's not something you're going to give like, here's your ongoing Batman title or Spider-Man title or something like that.
Or even like the Flash or Green Lantern or something.
Yeah.
But this is my preferred reading method. I love being able to complete a story. The ongoing side of comics, I found very exciting for a long time, and now I'm kind of like, I like getting variety, and I like getting closure. In doing these 12-issue, 6-issue, 20-issue limited series. Is really my preferred method. That being, I still read ongoing stuff, but the thing that gets me excited is yes, 12 issues. I can read it. I can hear what this author has to say. I can explore this world and these characters, and then I can stop and I can go on to the next thing. I'm not stuck doing this for the rest of my life. Because like, if you pull Batman's going to outlive you. Like, you're never going to pulling Batman.
Yeah.
My grandfather pulled Batman, and it's still going.
Yeah, you stop reading Batman when you just decide, you know what, I'm going to tap out. Because it's always going to, and that's both. I think you're right. That's a draw to some of those more popular ongoing comics. But it's also it can also be a hindrance, and it can also be a barrier to entry, because you look back, you're like, God, there's 80 years, literally 80 years of these characters, 60 years of these characters. How do you jump in? And the answer is you just do. But then you think, well, how do I jump off?
Right.
How do I leave? And then the answer there is just, well, you just stop. And that can be unfulfilling. And I'm with you. As much as I love reading those ongoing stories and seeing how characters get reinvented and changed, it's nice to know that you're going to pick up something that's, even if it's, 35, 36 issues or 50 issues, whatever it is, knowing it's complete and knowing that I can sit down and read all the way through, even if, again, one thing we've talked about a lot is endings. Endings are hard. And
looking at you, Morning Glories.
Yeah, that's a book that just stops. And that's part of the issue of some of these. Sometimes you have a limited series that doesn't get to quite end. If you don't actually get an ending, sometimes you just have to stop. But knowing when you have something contained, and obviously kind of the shorter it is, if it's 8 or 12, you can feel pretty confident that you're going to get a solid resolution. Although we'll get there when we talk about the end of the Flintstones here, but because this book doesn't really have a strong narrative through line. Like, it's not like it's
no, but the project itself to me is analogous of and I wonder what you'll think of this, because you're a huge fan. I think this project is similar to what Tom King will do. Take something kind of golden era, do a 12, like, he's not inventing new characters.
Yes.
He's taking pre-existing things putting a 21st century bent on a golden era, silver era thing.
There's a lot of similarities there. I think the one difference here that you and I were
totally
talking
different
about,
worldviews, between King and Russell. Yeah,
well,
no analogy there.
Actually, I don't think they're that far apart worldview wise, but I think something you and I talked about before we started recording was that it's a borderline anthology story, because it's really just each issue just kind of drops in. We're dropping in on Bedrock, and we're covering kind of a different part of society of life, and there is a chronology to it. You are following through time does elapse, but you could very easily see this being, you just drop in randomly and here's another story with no real connection.
If I owned this in single issue, I could hand any issue to any person who watched Flintstones cartoons as a kid, and they wouldn't be lost. They would be able to follow that. Yeah. And I love that there are 12 standalone stories here.
Yeah, with only just kind of the smallest, like, there's
connective tissue.
Your A and your B story, because most of the issues, almost all of them, have kind of multiple things they're hitting on, and you're really kind of your main storylines, the main commentary, and even kind of like the second one are really standalone. And then just at the bottom are some of these through lines that just connect. They don't connect story, they just kind of connect character and place. If you pick up an issue in the middle and you're wondering why Pebbles and Bam Bam are interning at the Science Institute, that's not going to throw you off from, well, I can't read this because I don't know the history of why they're, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just that if you read them in order, you see where they start where that comes from, and then as you read through, you see how that plays out. It's not super critical, because again, there isn't really some giant overall story they're trying to tell here. It's more just commentary, it's more just satire, and that works better, I think, in the way they presented it, which is this very episodic, very almost anthology way. And I think it makes for a fun read, because issue to issue, or as you're moving through the trades, kind of chapter to chapter, you don't know what the next target they're going to be aiming at is.
Although if you are a human, you will be in the crosshairs of this book at some point.
Oh yeah, no,
I think there
are no sacred cows here. There's nothing that's above reproach. I think that's something that Russell in his writing, and especially his most recent stuff he's been doing with Steve Pugh, as we discussed, is just there are no sacred cows.
He's an iconoclast. I mean, that's what he is. That's what he does. But I think this book is very much like a postmodern deconstruction of a child's cartoon. Although, okay, so we need to get into the book, because we've hashed a lot of stuff out in the Zero. But I will say, I have only vague recollections of Flintstones cartoons. I watched them as a kid, so like I know most of the characters' names, and I kind of know rough attributes, and then some of the more minor characters I didn't really remember. But like the Great Kazoo, I was like, as soon as he walked in, I was like, oh yeah, I remember him.
Yeah,
I would not have been able to tell you that was a Flintstones character
beforehand. Sure,
but I want to talk about this very opening thing. I would say one of my biggest nitpicks with the book is this one-page introduction at the museum.
Yeah,
I feel like it feels a little cookie cutter and rote, and it, like, didn't commit to it enough. It would have been one thing if this was the voice narrating the whole first issue, but for it to do one page and then drop us back there and then come back to it later, it felt like for your first draft you have to just start writing, and this is what came out, and they just never revisit.
I'm with you 100%. What I mentioned in the Zero was I came to this series after the third issue came out. So I read 3 in a row. If I had just read the first one for issue 1, because I think issue 1 is the weakest, if I had just read that, I don't know if I would have stuck with it, because I would have been afraid that weak framing device would have been how every issue was. That every issue was going to be modern day. Oh, here's something from the Stone Age, and isn't this funny how we? And so the commentary was going to be, here's what happens in Bedrock, but also here's what our modern day misinterpretation is. And I thought every issue was going to be like that because the first one was like that. And
that's a bad framing device, especially when you already have it built in with the aliens. And he does that later.
Well, and the aliens come in later. So yeah, I'm with you there. It starts off, which is why I think that first issue is the weakest, because that modern framing device. And I'm so glad they didn't go back to that, because if they had stuck with that, if that was every issue where the first page was here's the museum, and then we go into Bedrock, and then the final page is, and we're back to the museum again, because it's all about how we interpret or misinterpret things from the past.
Right.
I think I would have been out of. I think that would have been too gimmicky. It would have been too gimmicky.
It's too gimmicky, and like, not to be that guy, but that was never a framing device used in the cartoon.
No, it was not.
And it's like, why would you start that? But anyway, I was a little turned off by the first page, but then you open it and the splash page, like I just wrote splash in all caps in my notes here. You've got the Homo erectus bar with the martini glass, Plato's cave, obviously. Then you've got is it tar pit, for Target, and star bricks with no vowels there.
Spears and Roebuck.
Yeah, and so this is one I would love the script. I want to know what Steve Pugh was given. How much of this is Steve thinking of something, giggling to himself, and then writing in, tar pit.
Or how many of these were, are.
And this doesn't even have Outback Snakehouse.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot more.
You get there eventually.
I mean, are these things that are in the script, or are maybe the script has like 3 or 4 of them that Russell thought up, and it's like, along these lines, or maybe these come from conversations they had when they were creating the book. They were just throwing out random puns and just figuring out when they could deploy them.
But this felt you can't immediately. I was just immediately transported. This is what I remember the show being. Yes. The show was very tongue in cheek, and frankly, aside from the human actors, was very fourth wall about everything. Like, the appliance animals would turn to the camera and speak and say like, "Oh, brother," and stuff like that. And so, like, it was always very in on itself as a medium, which I think set it apart, because I don't think Jetsons was like that. Jetsons was meant to be like the futuristic version of this. And I don't remember people ever turning to the camera and talking, or there being like a futuristic version of Target. This has, a past version of Target. So I think Flintstones was unique in that way. Like no other Hanna-Barbera property.
And obviously, the series will start throwing curveballs very, very quickly. But this opening splash page is meant to, if you have any remembrance of the Flintstones, I think that this splash page is meant to, I don't want to put you at ease, but it's meant to say, hey, we understand what this is. We understand the setting here, and because it's all about, the modern day equivalents in the Stone Age. And so you see this, and I think you're like, okay, I know what this place is. I see what they're trying to do. And then obviously very quickly, as you get into the kind of commentary and satire that they're showing and what they start skewering, you're put on edge a little bit there. But I think initially that first splash page just tells you, like, they get what the setting is. They get what the joke is. And here is our entry point in that it is very similar to what the show was, because you're right, the cartoon was all about watching them do quote unquote modern things in a prehistoric way. But
I love that in both, like, they never explain how they have TV in camera. Like, there's no electricity.
No,
they're using animals as their appliances, but they have a TV that works, and it's just like, oh, whatever. Like, this is the world. Exactly.
It's not important as to the how or the why.
Right.
It just is.
So you just come to terms with that, and then you immediately, and I think this is Mark Russell timidly dipping his toe in the water for one page, then a beautiful splash page, and then immediately we're getting this plot line with the Cro-Mag workers. Which is just a scathing, brutal critique. There were multiple times during reading this where I would take a picture of a page with like a really pointed commentary and just put it in my Instagram story.
Yeah.
And people were like, what is this?
Yeah,
Like, it looks like
and-
it's for children. And that looks like a subreddit discussion, like critiquing capitalism or something, or
well,
economics. I think is the one that got the most, like the I think that's in volume 2. The professor of economics explaining what economics is.
I think that. Oh yeah, I think that is.
So we'll get there.
Yeah,
we'll get there next episode.
Yeah. But you're not wrong, because that is what the dialogue is. That is what he's doing. It is. Again, I don't want to say he's sneaking things in, because I think it's very clear once you read the first issue what his goal is. So, but on some level, yeah, there is this idea that he was able to sneak all these things in to a DC book, a book that has DC's logo prominently on the cover with, but I think
there's a lot of IP and money and ownership tied up with this franchise, and a lot of, I think this is the funniest part of the joke to me. There are a lot of innocents who would pick up this book. Like a lot of children would be like, a Flintstones book, and the parents would be like, yeah, that's fine. And meanwhile, it's like teaching them like all of this stuff about urban sprawl and PTSD. Well, even the Neanderthal thing, he calls them Cro-Mag employees.
Yeah.
And they say, actually, we're Neanderthals.
Yeah.
But I think he keeps calling them Cro-Mag.
He does. Yeah.
Is analogous to, I don't want to irritate people. That's Mark Russell's job. But in Ohio, big controversy last year when Cleveland changed their baseball team name to the Guardians. I have family in Cleveland that were all distraught about it. And I said, well, like, just try to imagine like an entire race of people being misnamed because a white guy hundreds of years ago mistook the land he was on. And now you honor them by calling them that name. Yeah. It's just a crazy thing that they were the Indians for so long, even though we are definitively not in India.
Yes, very much so.
This is I think that kind of riff is like the people in power decide what you are and how things are called, regardless of how you self-identify. The hegemony of Slate's power here, which we'll see time and time again through this series. And so I just thought that was a nice little throwaway line. That he's treating them as being so primitive and everything else, and that's ultimately the commentary of this story, which is we look down on them for being uncivilized. They see what civilization is, and they're like, hard pass.
Yeah, exactly. Like, nah,
we don't need that in our lives.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's presented that Mr. Slate's doing this like he's doing them a service. Like, look how primitive they are. I'm giving them jobs and opportunity. It's that. But
don't you think you're supposed to be cynical about Slate? Like, he knows he knows what he's doing. Yeah. He knows how to present it, but he knows that he's not doing anyone a favor except himself.
No, well, yeah, it could be because they're cheap labor. So they need, they're so primitive, they'll take whatever I give them. So I give them a little, I can give them a lot less than I give my other employees. So I'm helping them because they're so primitive and poor, but I'm helping myself because I'm saving a lot of money on labor, So, right. but he is that, just super cynical, if there's a villain in this story, quote unquote villain in the story, but large scale capitalist is one of them,
Yes. No, and that right there. Okay, so I'm glad that you didn't say Slate.
Yeah,
because the enemies here are ideologies.
Yeah.
He's deconstructing ideologies.
Yeah.
Slate is only the villain when he is the stand-in for that ideology.
Yeah,
and
when he's representative of that.
The priest is only the villain when he is the stand-in for fraudulent, phony religion.
Yeah,
and the scientist is only the villain when he is selling doomsday propaganda, based on sketchy math. Mm-hmm. So it's like,
although I think the art critics are always the villain.
Well, yes.
I
Which
think
is like so poignant right after he gets canceled from an indie comic run.
Yeah, I think
let's take our important
the
opinions
Uber,
elsewhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Uber snobby art critics are always the villain. They're never.
And I think that's
portrayed as
fair. You know,
yeah.
I have you know, I have some that I just can't resist reading. As Richard Brody is the one that comes to mind, who is New York Times and New Yorker. He's a movie critic, and I read everything he writes because it amuses me, even though so much of it in art criticism in general, you end up saying so much more about yourself than you do about the piece.
Yeah.
And that's what if there's a wonderful essay by Susan Sontag called Against Interpretation, where she argues that you know, interpretation is so much of the interpreter imposing a framework of understanding on a piece and then judging it according to that. And that's so reductive. And she's, you know, she kind of speculates like that's why art has become more abstract. Like where they're trying to obscure it to make it harder to impose framework on. And then people complain about how abstract and obscure things are. And it's like, well, I had to do this because you're the problem.
Yeah.
So if you don't like art becoming abstract, you know, stop imposing stuff on it and judging it by that criteria. So anyway, Susan Sontag, great read. You know, also on photography, I would recommend anything by Susan Sontag in part of your interpretive framework. But we have to keep moving because we're only on like page 4, like 20 minutes in.
I know. We're getting slow. There's a lot there because it's one of those things again that it's very clear what this main story is about the you know, these Neanderthal Cro-Mag workers. It's very clear what they're trying to get across, what they're trying to comment on. But there's so much in the background. There's so many like other things, like the art critic thing. You know, obviously comes into play in this issue. It's kind of the back half, so it starts kind of slow and then it picks up at the end. There are so many levels to these issues in terms of the things they're commenting on, the things they're trying to satirize.
Yeah. And he juggles a lot of plot lines too. I mean, like the next pages are the PTSD thing, which I don't want to talk about now. We'll get to that later when that comes to fruition.
And I think part of this goes back to what I was saying of why I think this first issue is my least favorite, because I think it's the most scattershot. The following issues will all be relatively more focused, you know, in terms of here's the thing we're talking about. Here's a thing, the one main topic we're going to be discussing in this issue. And you're right, the PTSD, the stuff that Fred and Barney went through, that does come up later. I think that comes up in issue 3 later on.
Yeah, it's in the front half of I'm reading the deluxe edition again that has everything all in one, and they're not numbered. But anyway,
but it does come up. So it's something they touch on here. It kind of laying the groundwork for. But yeah, then we move on and we go back to they're taking the guys out to I guess what comes down to an MMA fight, I guess, just a brawl.
Yeah, I mean, I just call it boxing. But
yeah,
and honestly, I admire Mark Russell's restraint here because later Fred's watching Neanderthal on TV, which looks like American football, and here there's a boxing match. He just puts it on display. He doesn't make a cheap shot about like how primitive it is in the 21st century to be playing these violent sports. I think that's just too easy for him. He's going to leave that alone. He's just going to put it in front of you that like, hey, look what Neanderthals do with their time. Yeah. And like, there's not even a need for like a pointed comment about that.
I think it comes in the page when they're at the boxing match and they cut to the crowd and we see Fred and Barney. They're all like into it. And behind them are the 3 guys who just have these horrified, have this horrified look like, what is this? This is so
this is civilization, right? Yeah.
That's your commentary right there. That's your commentary. Also, like the final panel on that, when they're interviewing the winner and the losers in the background, who's like subtly getting eaten by the pterodactyls. Like just there because he lost. I think that that's one of those subtler commentaries where he doesn't need to say anything. It's just, we're going to show that to you. We're going to move on. And
frankly, real Paper Girl vibes from the pterodactyls eating people.
Yeah. But
just a little callback to our first story arc.
Yeah, but there it's like, that's one of those things that maybe you don't get the first time you read through, maybe not the second time you read through. But that's
the thing. This book took me so much longer to read than I think any other comic I've ever read. Because
you want to keep going back, you want to focus on everything.
You have to see everything Steve Pugh is doing. Yeah. There's so much commentary in the words that it's easy to miss the commentary on the page, and it is a visual medium. Yeah,
in the background. So there's level 1 you'll get right away. Maybe you'll get some of level 2, but then like levels 3 through however many he puts in there, it takes multiple viewings, multiple readings. Maybe you just go through this and you don't read anything. You just focus on the art. You just look at the panels and you see what's there. And I think you'll find things you missed the first time. And that's what's so great about this particular series. But yeah, there's always stuff in the background. There's always something. Someone is making a face doing, there's, background characters that get no commentary but when you see it, then now that's all you can see in the panel on the page, and it really is great. It really is genius like that.
Yeah. So anyway, they go to Outback Steakhouse, nothing. I mean, we've got to get past the first issue here. Yeah. So I don't want to, like the motivational poster in Slate's office and I mean, just like every little detail, just soak it all in. And again, I'm with you. This is my least favorite of the issues, but it's still so rich. Yeah. Especially when you know where he's going and that all of this is, laying pipe for future storytelling.
Indeed.
So anyway, Neanderthals go to work, literally crush it because it is rock crushing.
Yep.
They're great.
They have no concept of money either. They
have no concept of money. You buy something someone else hated making. That's absolutely savage.
It's a vicious line. Vicious line.
And and again, the tone for Mark Russell is extreme cynicism.
Yes.
But like every good cynic, like a George Carlin, there is a heart for people at the core, which is what he addresses in his opening letter that we read in the Zero episode. Is like he is going to take an honest and even cynical look at everything. But what ultimately makes all of this worth doing is the people and the characters. Yes. And frankly, I read that letter in the front of the book and I read this issue and I was like, I don't think you have done enough, heartwarming stuff with the people to offset the scathing cynicism. In fact, I don't think you really get it in volume 1. It's like you barely get it.
I think you're right. I think
it's volume 2 is where it starts to get heartwarming. And you realize Fred is a really decent person.
Yeah, I
not
think
perfect, but flawed for sure, but decent. But
there is a bit of a setup that your first half is just like uber cynic, and then the back half is like, yes, okay, but there's something to it now. That it I think the back half of the story is like there's still cynicism, but it's not. There's not hopelessness, right. Things are bad. Things are bad. Here's why they're bad, but we have the capacity to do better. And it's like I'm calling out the bad things because I believe we can fix them and make them better versus I'm calling out the bad things because I think we're all doomed and this is terrible. So I think,
although I think without that framework of knowing like who he is, where he's going, where he's coming from, the first issue and really even the first 6 issues,
it can be pretty dour.
See him as
it can be,
just tearing down.
It is. You can. There's definitely that read. There are less moments.
I think is really the right word for it. Yeah. He is dismantling the systems and ideologies of the world, and like all postmodern deconstructionists, he's not offering a better alternative or replacement. He's just criticizing this. And kind of the flaw with postmodernism is, one, you're not offering an alternative because the world is not one where we just have perfect systems and imperfect systems and we just chose the wrong one. We're always choosing between flawed systems, and it's kind of cowardly to just dismantle everything without offering an alternative. But that's not that's where I was afraid Russell was going. So
well, and that, I think that's a fair criticism. I think also because when you look at some of the targets he goes at, like, they're the really obvious ones. Like, they're the really easy targets to go at, so it isn't like
it's what people go after on Twitter every day.
So it isn't like he was stretching too hard. At first, it didn't seem like he's stretching too hard to find material to mine and to take aim at. A lot of it's pretty obvious stuff, whether you're a cynic or not. These are big topics, and they seem like easy, low-hanging fruit. And so I think you're right. There is a criticism there, a valid one, about when you start reading this book. There aren't any alternatives. There's no upside. There's no upside. It's all right. Here's what's terrible. Here's why it's terrible, and here's why it's always going to be terrible. And that's that's all you're getting from the jump.
I'm not saying that's his job or anything like that. I'm just saying from a philosophical standpoint, you would expect someone with such a strong critique of capitalism to then be promoting communism or something. But he's not pro anything.
No,
he's just looking at what there is. And the best definition I've ever heard of cynicism is seeing through things. Like, you assume everything has a false face. And you see through. I mean, if you go back to like the Greek, we're not going to do that, but it's this assumption that nothing is innocent, nothing is what it appears to be, and it is my job as the cynic to unmask everything.
And I think that's perfect for what Russell and Pugh do on these issues. That they look at everything here and say, well,
and there's nothing that they go after that, in my opinion, isn't fair game. And
I agree.
I'm a religious man. And I think his criticisms of the religion practice here are completely fair. I believe, in science, and I think his criticism of science is fair.
Yeah, because he's not going after the idea of religion or science. What he's really going after is like the use of it, the presentation.
Misuse, yes.
Exactly.
The imposition.
Like
any power grab. That's out of order for those things. Or it seems like he's even disappointed in religion for being fixated on the type of donuts they serve instead of more substantial things that they could be focusing on. And now, so it's like he's not saying it's wrong to focus on those things in some way, but the attractional, like, throw money at it in order to collect money from it is very cynical. But there's a whole issue that deals with religion.
I was gonna say we should specifically we should be careful.
We should end issue 1 by saying this. No offense, but it seems like the whole point of civilization is to get someone else to do your killing for you. I had to really chew on that. I mean, I really, really thought, oh my goodness. Like, I, as an American citizen, whether I chose to or voted to or was even born yet in the benefactor of the American military winning many skirmishes, wars and conflicts in the past, my lifestyle is better because of that. And all I had to do was like pay taxes, be part of it, and someone else did killing that benefited me. And it's like, wow, that is just that is brutal. And again, I don't think Russell, I think there's a way to like lob like cynicism in a cheap way that any hack can do it. This is really targeted, precise. And if you're being honest, this is true.
I was gonna compare
that's not all civilization is.
No. Well,
but
I was gonna compare it back to the idea, the line you quoted that Fred say, well, what do you do with money? I said, I don't know. You buy something that someone else hated to make. On the surface, both of those things, both those commentaries, they feel very reductive. You're like, oh, that's just it's very superficial. It's very glib. I think a lot of the stuff that he writes, a lot of his commentary can be read that way. But you're right, that doesn't mean he's wrong. Doesn't mean that.
Right.
He may not be absolutely correct, but it doesn't mean he's wrong. He he's pointing that lens back at it. And part of the uncomfortableness of it is because there's more. I think there's more than just a grain of truth. Like there's a lot of truth in that.
Oh, there's substantial. Yeah.
It isn't just a small bit there. There's a lot that's really, really weighty. It's funny to say, it's funny to read, but kind of the more you sit on it, the more you chew on it, kind of maybe the more disturbed you get, because you start seeing that, like it maybe there's more truth there than falsehood, that it's maybe that maybe you think the same thing. Maybe you deliberately ignored some of these things because you didn't want to deal with the uncomfortable truth of it. He's trying to expose that. And he said he does it in a way that I think you can, if you are so disposed, you can dismiss it as being glib, that's just ridiculous. And then you close the book and you're done. But if you're open-minded enough to really let it marinate.
Well, and I think if you press on, if you keep going to really hear, I think a superficial reading of the first issue, you would think he hates the Flintstones. He hates DC. He hates Hanna-Barbera. He hates society.
He hates society.
Right. And it's like, that's not, I don't know Mark Russell, but I don't think that's who he is.
No,
I don't think there's any reason to suggest that. Although he does hate art critics.
Yeah.
Because the last thing we get here is the primitive art gallery.
Yeah.
And I'm bored. Let's take our challenging commentary elsewhere. Like, get out of here. This is so brutal. And I love that Wilma eventually gets her redemption in this story arc, and there's eventually a really beautiful it's in this issue, a really beautiful backstory of why she does the art she does and why it's so meaningful to her.
Why it's important to her. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And you realize, like, oh, this is not a cheap imitation of anything. This is her truest form of expression, which is what art is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But the critics didn't want to understand her perspective. They just wanted to use the tools they have to register the opinions they have on any piece that was unfortunate enough to be in front of them. And then we end with the kind of boring flashback to if you open with it, you have to close with it.
Yes.
But at least it's behind us now.
And so that's one of those things where I remember getting the first issue and being like, oh, right, we got to go back to that. And then that was the initial worry of like, well, gee, what's issue 2 going to be? Are we going to do the same thing again? And then for me being very, very glad, like, oh, maybe we don't get that. So maybe we're not getting that framing device all the way through. And I felt much better about the series going forward. Because I didn't, that was the weakest part of what I think was the weakest issue, even though there's a lot of really good stuff there. Just having that framing device feels like a really unnecessary crutch if they had done it every issue, right?
Yeah, it would be bad. And it's just, and unnecessary is the best word. It's not even, it wasn't that it was like lacking taste or that it technically worked for what it was, but you didn't.
Because it would have been the same commentary every time, right? It would have been
the exact same thing.
It would have been someone
us being snide about their civilization and then realizing theirs is the same as ours and yada
exactly
yada.
Or someone making a Snyder mark, making a wildly inaccurate assumption of what this thing is or was that we found, and then we get the issue showing that what it actually was, and it's just a parallel to our world. And then we cut back to it would have gotten really stale really, really quickly. So I'm really glad they didn't follow up on that and feel the need like, oh, we have to have this tie every time. We have to have a hook, because that's one of the things that when we discuss these DC Hanna-Barbera not crossovers, but this line that that DC was putting forth, that almost all the books had some sort of hook to them,
right? And
the Flintstones didn't. The Flintstones was just, here's a version of the Flintstones, and their hook was something much, much bigger in terms of this kind of like satire and commentary. But their hook could have been that framing device from the first from the first issue, where every issue was us looking back on them as opposed to just getting a story. And I'm glad they didn't go that way, because it would have been a significantly lesser book, I think, a significantly lesser comic. So
for sure. Okay, so now we're in issue 2. This one, like, I have like very few notes here, so I think we're gonna move at a faster clip. This Buyer Beware, kind of a good standalone piece, much better issue than the first one. It's just much more focused and targeted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's on the invention of stuff, basically.
Yeah,
it's like
it's consumerism.
We've created these jobs in exchange for the job. We've given you money. Now we have to give you something to do with the money. And so you see, the mall opening, and the one that hit home the most was Bone Depot. Says, hey, you look like you're a man who's serious about weeds. And she says, what's a weed? He said, it's I don't know how to answer that question. And my wife and I get into this a fair amount because she's into composting and she's into gardening, and she's into biodiversity in the yard, whereas I kind of would like my yard looking kind of tidy and neat. And we had this huge disagreement. Like, the same week I was reading this, I wanted to like clear out this little patch of garbage on the side of our house because this weed had shot up to like 8 feet, but then it bloomed, and it was a hibiscus flower of some kind. And I was like, Susan, please let me take this weed out. She's like, well, it's not a weed. And I was like, it is a weed. It's like taller than the window in front of it. It's taller than anything we want to be growing there. It's a weed. She said, well, no, you just told me like what type of flower it is. I was like, yeah, but that's like, we didn't plant it, so it's a weed. And then I read this and I was like, dang it. I've totally bought into the consumer, like the construct of like, in Cincinnati, the great weed that plagues us all is honeysuckle, which is what the whole region would be covered with if people didn't live here. But we have moved in. It's invasive and it grows fast, and we don't want it, so it is a weed. Yeah. But yeah, if you go to Home Depot rather than Bone Depot, you can buy a weed killer. And like, I dare you to go into Home Depot and ask the person, which plants specifically does this kill? Like, please define weed for me. I think it's still very hard to do. Like, I guess like ragweed, has weed there in the name, but for the most part, weeds are completely a construct. I will grant him full marks on that one.
It's just the thing that you don't want growing there,
right? And he's taking the power goat out. Extremely brutal life. A lot of these animals have terrible lives. The power goat with its legs, it has legs, but they're like tied up, put on a skewer so that he can hold him like a weed whacker. Extremely tough beat for the goat. The appliances are one of those. I think that's one of the running storylines that I don't think you don't know is happening as you're reading until it hits a certain point, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, is this the most important thing in the comic? I think it hits you very subtly. We'll get there towards the end of this arc, but one of my favorite pages in recent comic history comes from this book, and we'll get there. But it involves the appliances, and it's one of those things that's really sneaky because it starts very funny here with Power Goat. It's hilarious, and I will say this is where the cynicism and criticism becomes more targeted and therefore more meaningful, because the first one was kind of like broad strokes criticism of capitalism, which I see every day on my Twitter feed, my Instagram feed, and my TikTok feed. Like, people just railing against capitalism, critiquing, big money grabs. We're recording this like the week that Elon Musk has taken over Twitter and just laid off 7,500 employees by sending them Elon Musk memes in their email. Like, this stuff, like, real that solid. Criticism writes itself. Like, we don't need a great artist to come along and point out the absurdity there. That's almost impossible. That's almost impossible to satire, because it's almost satire in real life. Right. I mean, and that's the thing, is like, this is why the mockumentary style of the double O's became so popular, because they they didn't have to do farcical stuff anymore. They just had to have someone look at the camera and be like, can you believe this is happening?
Yeah,
because
like,
that's
what are we
how
doing?
every millennial in the workforce felt
Mhm.
when we were entering. We were like watching boomers use computers, and we were like, is there, like, can I jim the camera? Like, is there anywhere I can look just in despair and defeat to say, what is this? And, you know, the Jim looking at the camera in the office is exactly lifted from the Flintstones cartoons.
Yeah.
You know, that is what the animals did in the cartoon.
The animals are commenting on the humans.
Right.
You know, and in a way, and so having it introduced here, you know, with Power Goat, and then we have the dishwasher, you have the record player, can opener, I guess the coat rack. You have all sorts of things here, and again, these are all staples of the Flintstones cartoon. You know, as if you were someone who was aware and knew the Flintstones, this is the introduction. You're seeing all this stuff here. You're seeing all these things come into play, all these elements that you would have, you wouldn't have, that weren't in that first issue. So he's bringing them back, and he's bringing them back in a way that, hopefully makes you rethink their existence.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, and yeah. And then he immediately moves on to religion, and he's got a lot of bones to pick with the religion.
He does.
That being said, like, hang with him, because he has a really beautiful, empathetic take on this character by the end of the arc.
Yes.
But he's going to take some punches. You know, he's going to take some body blows before we get there.
And as we discussed, religion specifically is the topic that has gotten Russell's work the most criticism, outside criticism, has the most, I guess, controversy surrounding it. Not of his making, of just its kind of mere existence. In terms of some of the books he's written, so it's not shocking that it would play a role here, because this is, kind of early comic work for him. He's working out some of his ideas. He plays much more into this idea in his book Second Coming, that they did, that received a lot of controversy, a lot of media scrutiny.
Well, God is disappointed in you. Yeah. I mean, but again, I think all of his criticism is of bad religion. And I have I don't want to be defending bad religion. That's my thing.
It comes down to if you are in that picture or not. If you are someone who thinks this view of religion is what it is, you're going to be offended by it. So I think he has been, a lot of charges have been leveled against him that he is anti-religion, specifically anti-Christianity. I think there's a lot of that there. I don't think he is. I very much don't think he is.
I mean, I think he's against it as a hegemonic power in society.
Yeah. Yes.
And so am I.
He's against how religion, specifically Christianity in this country, how it is used. I think both as a shield and a sword, depending on what is needed, as opposed to being like a belief system and a way you live your life and a way you view the world. It becomes these other parts of what religion is kind of bastardized and become. I think you bad religion. I agree with it entirely, but that all depends on what side of the fence you're on. If you're in that, you think this is the way it's supposed to be, and you see his commentary, his critique, and you get very offended by it because no, this is the way, this is what I believe, this is what it's supposed to be. When that's, he's commenting on not the base, not faith. He's not commenting on that. He's commenting on the Christianity industrial complex or whatever.
Exactly. That's a perfect term for it.
Yeah.
And
it starts here. It starts here.
Right. And I think
it becomes one of the through lines that is sprinkled in. It's like the C or the D storyline. Every so often we jump back to the church.
Yeah. And I think there's like, if you're a good reader, and this is not about reading Mark Russell, this is just being a good reader in general. And you are a Christian, and you read this type of critique of a form of, Christianity or religion, and you're something in there is like, hey, that, that kind of bothers me. There are a few ways to do this. One would be to like disavow it, try to destroy it, which is like the OG cancel culture, which, by the way, Christians in the 70s, 80s, 90s invented. Of like boycotting pop culture and things like that. And now they're offended by it, whatever. But that was one approach to it. The other approach is to just say, just going to ignore it, just going to tune it out, which is like what a lot of religious people do. They create parallel structures of pop culture. They have, Christian music. I don't know if you ever heard Mike Birbiglia stand up about how, he's, when he drives from show to show and he listens to the radio, every once in a while he'll find a station and he'll be like, oh, this song's kind of okay. And then it turns into a Jesus ballad. And it's like, no, I was tricked. And it's like, why would you do that? I mean, to me, like some of the greatest musicians in the world, whether it be, Beethoven or Bach, were writing music from the vantage point of their belief system and their faith, but it was not something that only people who agree with them could listen to. And so I think these are like thin skin moves from crappy religion. And I think if you find yourself identifying, with the criticism of this, the smart reader will say, oh, maybe I need to update that. Like,
maybe I need to examine why.
Right. You don't need to like abandon, the good parts of, the parts that are, have always been helpful and true. But these things are corrosive, destructive, and really obscure what religion should be about. And I think, I think I go back to this quote a lot, but George Carlin, inside every cynic is a disappointed idealist. I think Mark Russell, in order to be a cynic, has a really beautiful understanding of what religion can and should be.
Yeah, and he gets there at the end.
And
at the end of the series. Yeah,
and he gets there at the end, and seeing this monstrosity is what he's so disappointed in.
I agree. And he starts laying the groundwork here, and said as it's sprinkled in through, whether it's various other issues here, he keeps building up the thing that he dislikes about it, so he can, at the end, when it tears it down, he can then present what he believes his idea actually is. And it's not ultimately that faith and religion and belief is bad. That's not right, the thing he's really against.
Like, I think, and if he had done that in reverse, if he had started, the really beautiful depiction first and then criticized it for 11 issues, that doesn't work.
It doesn't. I'm trying to think about, you would then just like you would tune it out then, right? You wouldn't.
Right. You just wouldn't hear it because you'd be like, well, I know where he lies deep down.
Every time we went back to it, every time they went back to the church at that point and showed something else, you'd be like, oh, whatever. Just, it doesn't, that doesn't
like
matter.
We already know what the real nugget is. He's getting at. So we don't care about the chipping away the crappy stuff first. And that's what he's doing. He's like someone looking at a big stone with a chisel, and he can see what the beautiful thing, the statue is inside. Yeah. And so for 12 issues, he's going to chisel away at religion. He's going to chisel away at science. He's going to chisel away at civilization,
at the things,
human relationships, and
at the things
and marriage
that other people think are important about this, but it's not.
Right.
That's what he's taking in mind. That's really great. And I'm going to look past the what I'm going to assume was a carefully planned stone pun.
It was not. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But I don't want to get out of this issue without, obviously the main theme here is this about consumerism, material goods, but we can't overlook the B storyline about the vitamins.
Right.
If you are of a certain age, in this country, there's a good chance you ate Flintstones vitamins as a kid.
100%. I did.
Delicious. So absolutely, they were, because they might as well just have been candy. But I love.
Yeah, I had them after eating Fruity Pebbles. By the way, are you a Fruity or Cocoa? I like them both.
I would have didn't have a lot of cereal growing up, that kind of cereal, but I prefer Cocoa Pebbles. That was mine.
Okay.
Yeah. But I love how they managed to, in this story, not just bring in bring in all parts of the Flintstones ethos, that the Flintstones vitamins are as important to the idea of the Flintstones as anything you saw in the comics,
Right.
and the cartoons, anything you saw in any movies, anything like that. The vitamins are an important part of the mythos of the Flintstones, and they found a way to put it in the
The
comic.
only thing that I would have done differently is I would have loved it if they called it like Cro-Mag vitamins. Which, like us referring to the the Stone Age people as Flintstone vitamins,
Yep.
if they had, and again, the people they're referring to self-identify as Neanderthals,
Yes,
but to call the product Cro-Mag vitamins seems like that would have been the perfect bow.
That really would have been just another level.
But there's plenty of levels without that.
Yeah, there are.
So there's all the toothpaste and products. Like I just immediately they go from 0 to 100 with the products.
Yeah.
And then the domestication of animals, which there's a whole issue about domestication.
Well, but so at the end there, we get the secret origin of Dino.
Yes.
As an appliance that was going to be recycled. When they had, which is
Absolutely.
it's brutal. It's so brutal.
And later in this, you'll see them literally throw away a living animal because it's a broken appliance.
It's a broken, and when Fred asked, what does it do? He's like, I don't know anything. It's like, perfect, I'll take it. And you see it's Dino, and I'm not a pet owner, but still, there's something about that. You're like, wow, there's something there, and again, that sets up this other through line, this idea that Dino is a pet, but yet animals are supposed to be quote unquote appliances here. So he's a traitor, as it were. We get to that down the line here, but again, setting all these things up here. But that's just again to kind of reframe everything you think about the Flintstones and what they are and what they're about. See them all in kind of a different light. And I think so we get that in issue 2 here. We get the origin of Dino, and then moving into issue 3, we get the
space race.
But we get the origin also of Yabba-dabba-do. It changes the context of what that is. Again, that's one of the signature things when you think about the Flintstones, for Fred Flintstone.
The first thing I think of is Wilma, from the opening credits. But Yabba-dabba-do is right up there.
And then to take that and reframe that as like some sort of PTSD coping device.
Yeah.
Some mental health, like a trigger for them to remember that the world isn't all at war, that things can get better, and it's a coping mechanism. It kind of melts your brain.
And speaking of coping mechanisms, this is when we were talking pre-podcast, and we both delighted in the same observation on the first panel of issue 3. Bedrock Middle School, the name of the school, or the mascot, is Home of the Fighting Tree People, which is an appropriation from the Paleolithic Wars that all the men in town still have PTSD from.
Exactly.
Their conquered enemy is now made like a heroic or meant to be a mascot. And again, this goes back to like the Cleveland Guardians thing in baseball.
Exactly. The idea
that
like
people that were absolutely brutalized were like, in hindsight, it's like, actually they're pretty noble, pretty strong, pretty wise. We're gonna make them our mascot, but we're gonna use our name for them. And it's just like in full marks for wanting to respect them, but you get 0 out of 100 for execution here. And I don't think it was I don't think whoever picked that from the middle school meant it like to be a source of derision. It was an earnest choice by someone, because that's what civilization does.
Exactly.
To its conquered enemies.
And when we think about all of our school and professional team mascots that have questionable origins, they're all the same kind of way. No one's, maybe except even when they, I got a hard time defending the Washington football team / Commanders and their former name, because that's like a straight up racial slur. But yeah, like
It's
the
really
Chiefs
bad.
and the Chiefs and the Braves, or even a lot of colleges in this country, when they take the name of maybe the local indigenous tribe, whether they are the Seminoles, the Sioux, the Illini, you know, a lot of those schools have for many years worked with the local tribes and communities, you know, and a lot of them have their blessing. But just because they have the blessing of that tribe, of those people, does that mean it's still okay to use? You know, that's one of those things that you know, I'm not going to weigh in on, because I'm not from that group, you know.
Right.
But
I mean, that's the thing, is like, yeah, you got the modern, you know, the modern people from that group to sign off on it. But to me, it's like,
what's the history of
why
it?
are you trying to figure out where the line is? Why don't you step further back from the line?
Exactly.
Like your alma mater, I'm sure, has a wonderful relationship with the Cavalier people.
Yes.
And you know, mine has with the Bearcats, which makes everyone ask, what is a Bearcat? Well, you know, the funny thing is, like, they're called the Bearcats, and the Binturong was a retcon. It was named after a football player named Bear, Behr, who moved like a cat, and they chanted Bearcat when he's on the field. But people kept chanting after he graduated, and they were like, I guess we're the Bearcats now. This is like in the 1920s.
So now we got to figure out what a Bearcat is.
Right. And then they went to like every zoo in the country. We're like, what kind of looks like a bear and a cat? So the Binturong was renamed to suit the University of Cincinnati.
But no, they're
you know,
but
still a better beat than the Cleveland Indians.
Yes, or the fighting tree people. But again, it's one of those things. It's in that first panel, and it's not talked about. But then, as you go through this issue and further on, and you find out who the tree people were, and that they were just the indigenous population that got wiped out so they could make Bedrock. You know,
right. And this, to me, okay, so this one felt like reading Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States of America. I don't know if you ever read that.
No, I didn't, but
it's just like he will go through like every segment of U.S. history and just assume the opposite side. You know, when it comes to the colonizers versus the indigenous people, he will give you a close-in look at the nobility, strength, and everything else of the indigenous people that were here, and show the colonizers in contrast to that. So he's always assuming the opposite side, which is what he does with the tree people. It's like, now, if the tree people were the protagonists here, Mark Russell would have a criticism of, you know, like, I don't know, whatever's wrong with the tree people. But because they're the oppressed ones here, we're going to get their side of the story, which is great.
It is.
I also love, you know, the space race stuff is, well, it just cracks me up. Not only that the chimp is tell my wife I love her very much, and the dinosaur being dropped onto the launch pad says she knows. Like, the best conversations here are between the animals.
They said, again, you come to realize that it's possible that the appliances are the most important characters. The most important things are being said between them as you move through. But yeah, there's a great juxtaposition in this issue, again, with the
but there's a two-sided juxtaposition, which gets even better.
Well, exactly. With you have,
because you think, oh my gosh, these people are so stupid and the animals are so good.
Yeah.
And you just are like totally disgusted with them, and then the aliens roll in.
Yes. Yeah. And so you have the aliens who, they're not really colonizing Bedrock, but the idea that this superior force comes in,
tourizing it, which is worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's like it's capitalist tourism, which is
and that's juxtaposed here also with how, you know, our characters went in, our Bedrock characters went in and took out the tree people. You know, this other culture that they went and invaded. We're seeing all these sides here. And the end result is we end up with the Great Gazoo, which is another staple of the
well, I think more importantly, we see that this is the quote unquote more civilized society, more advanced society.
Yes.
They've invented intergalactic flight, and their kids are the worst.
Yeah.
They are like drunken party animals, complete bullies and just the absolute worst type of being. And that's the fruit of great civilization.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's and so in the opening pages, you think these people of Bedrock are so stupid, they're mistreating these animals. And then you see the more advanced version of society, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're even worse than the Bedrock people. Maybe the Bedrock people aren't so bad after all.
Yeah.
And so Mark Russell has you right where he wants you.
And there is something too that I think is a through line through a lot of Russell's work, in that the smartest characters, the most observant, smartest characters in his work are oftentimes the children of your so-called main characters. So like throughout this entire series, the only person with any actual sense really is Pebbles. The only one who sees what's going on, the only one who has any level of real intelligence of know-how amongst all the adults and even the other children is Pebbles. She is the one who can look at her parents and be like, yeah, I love them. They're great, but they're kind of idiots. They don't know what's going on. You know,
which is like kind of a classic trope of cartoons. You know, it's The Simpsons, Family Guy.
Is. Yeah. The idea that the younger generation is the one that looks up and has some sense of understanding, a different level of clarity. And we start seeing that here. We start seeing, you know, kind of her, just her character versus, again, the other kids, the
that
alien
being said,
kids
I still think
in.
Bam Bam's an idiot.
Oh, no.
Like a lovable idiot.
I'm talking specifically about Pebbles only.
Yeah,
she's the
Pebbles.
one. Yeah,
okay.
She's the one.
They both begin their foray into science here.
They do, yeah.
But it seems like he's just along for the ride because he's friends with Pebbles.
Yeah.
And she's the driver of this. And by the way, I almost called him Carl because it's Professor Sargon.
Sargon,
yes, clearly Sagan.
Yeah, Carl Sagan. Yes.
So it's a Freudian slip on my part. I blew the lead there.
But no,
but I love this idea that the dominant species has idiot kids. Like, to me, that was the big takeaway from volume or from issue 3.
Yeah, and there's so many fun things in terms of how they are drawn and depicted, in terms of, like, you know, how they're clothed, like the tribal tattoo on the arm or something like that. Like just the worst version of the worst people you knew in college. That's who these are, you know, as they're on galactic break, as it were.
And in the meantime, like one of them gets killed in the crossfire, Joe, who, by the way, was suicidal.
Yeah.
Like really dark stuff. Suicidal from PTSD.
Yes.
You know, going to these group meetings. I actually found that to be probably the most moving thing in volume 1, like in the first 6 issues. Unless there's one, I'm not going to spoil it, and if it's not here, but there's one other story beat that really got me. But this one, him dying, and then society making a statue of the monkey they lost by throwing into space instead of the guy who fought in the Paleolithic Wars and then gave his life, defending them from the alien children. It's like, oh my gosh, like I can't think of anything more excruciating than watching this unfold, but we see it all the time. I mean, this is real.
Yeah. And it's presented, obviously there's
Sergeant Grumbles.
Yeah, the colors are so bright. The Steve Pugh's art has there's kind of an inherent kind of comedic nature to it. There's a cartoonishness to it. So there's a lightness to what you're reading and what you're seeing that appears. But you look at it and you see
the juxtaposition.
Joe is he's we have that one scene earlier, and maybe it's just a panel or two where he's back wherever he's living, and it's just like this one bedroom, like it's just there's nothing there. You know, he's in this super dark place, and it's only when you know Fred and Barney go there and be like, hey, we need you, we need the soldier again. You know, he found no way to
he never learned how to move past being a soldier, but he's still good at being a soldier. And by the way, that's a shout out to Chris Chuckry, the colorist.
Yes. It's
I mean, Steve
so
Pugh's pencil and ink.
But it's so bright. It jumps off the page, but there's some really, really dark stuff there. And Joe is that character. And you're like, wow, there is there is a lot of truth in that.
Right. Oh yeah.
In terms of, especially at this time, when you think about when this was written, 2005 coming out 2015 coming out in 2016, the amount of wars we had been in for the past, at that point, almost 15 some odd years, generations of people, generations of Americans having gone off and come back from war, and how do we deal with that? And to see it in this way, I'm sure, it's so pointed.
Like, homeless veterans and uninsured veterans and all those other things is like heartbreaking stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a punchline, but it's not irreverent. And I think that's the beauty of Mark Russell, is he's like irreverent and flippant about religion and all these other things, and then he's bringing up serious issues, but he knows when to become somber and serious.
Yeah. Again, Joe is not the joke.
No, society is the joke.
Society's reaction to him and
it's
someone
dark
like
humor,
Joe.
Because it's not laugh out loud humor. It's just like, ooh, that.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable humor. Yeah, because Joe is never made. He is never made to be the butt of the joke. The PTSD, the trauma, that's never meant to be the joke. It is the society's reaction to that, how they treat those people, how they see those people. That's the mirror he's holding up to. That's what he's trying to skewer. Because I don't think that isn't a line you would cross, because that's a line into just being an absolutely terrible person. As a writer.
I mean, there are like stand-up comedians who would, like
and
being edgy and shock jocks.
Yeah,
who would say stuff like that. But
I think it's important to notice. Soldier.
Right. And I think it's important to note that while he is cynical and iconoclast and all these things that we keep saying, he's not a shock jock.
No.
There's not like a bunch of there's no profanity in here that I recall.
No.
There's not nudity. In fact, I actually think by the standards of like Flintstones, comic books, all the other things, I think women are portrayed relatively modestly when there's been a lot of objectification in the past for characters like Wilma and stuff like that. So I feel like I kind of had like a little bit of a radar for that, of like, oh, are they gonna like try to do some like crappy Halloween costume version of these characters? And it's like, no, they're people. There's in fact, I was hesitant to even bring that up because it feels like you shouldn't really get credit for how it should be done.
Yeah,
but the fact that the industry at times has been so bad at depicting the human body. In fact, the most unrealistic depiction are Barney and Fred, who are
Barney. Oh yeah, no, the
like
Fred's proportions are as a being aren't even anywhere close to anything realistic. Yeah,
like the closest absurd. Would be like Dave Bautista or Dwayne Johnson. Yeah, and even then they'd have to wear some padding or CGI and then have these roles,
and then have their arms like be like 1.5 times longer. Like they're just
right.
It doesn't make any sense. But no, it's that isn't the point of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to comment on. So yeah, they get credit for not doing something. I guess you're right, because
which would be Steve Pugh. Steve Pugh. I don't know.
Their character design isn't that's not what they're pointing their radar at, at this time. So
right. And moving on, we've not discussed any cover art yet, but I think issue 4 deserves a little bit of attention.
Yeah,
picket signs. Take a wife, not on your life. Keep it polygamous. A child deserves several fathers and about a dozen mothers. Monogamy destroys.
Yeah.
Really pointed issue here.
Yeah.
Now this one cuts. The storytelling of this is about 1,000 years before the Flintstone. So this is the inverse of how issue 1 opens. But this one, while it's not in the it's not in the show, this one works a little better for me than issue 1.
I think so too. I think so too.
And this one's called Domestications. And it starts with the domesticating of the arbitrary distinction of which animals are pets and which ones are food and which ones are
appliances in this case.
Or appliances. Yeah. Well, it starts with him hugging a saber tooth. I love you, kitty.
Yeah.
And the cat thinking, I prefer you to starvation, which 100% every cat owner knows, like, if this animal were the same size as me, I would be breakfast. But they're cute and cuddly because they're so much smaller than me. In fact, it's kind of dark, but my wife and I have occasionally wondered, like, if one of us died, would the cats eventually eat us?
I mean, probably.
That's kind of what I think. I mean, I think they do love me and they're affectionate towards me, but I think, you lay there long enough, dead enough, and you're not getting food for them. What are their options? Yeah.
You become food. So
really bleak stuff for pet owners.
It is. But again, we the first panel back in the present day is you see Pebbles playing with Dino, and you see the I guess that's the mixer, right? The stand mixer there, who refers to Dino as a traitor, because he doesn't do anything. He's just a pet. He's not an appliance. He serves no utile function as far as they see. So he's on the outside.
Although that being said, I think that's more criticism. Like, the bird is calling him a traitor, even though the bird would gladly be in his position.
Well, yeah.
So it's like, that's like, it's not that he. Okay, I guess the problem here's my criticism of the bird, which is a sentence I never thought I would say. The problem is he thinks Dino shouldn't have that, when in reality, what he should be saying is like, no, Dino, I don't want to take anything away from Dino. I want everyone to have what Dino has.
Yes.
And I think that's the problem, is when we pit classes against each other like that, we start the scarcity mentality of only so many people can have a good life, and it shouldn't be them. And it's like, no. What our goal should be, more people have a good life.
And what we see through the story with the appliances is the idea that they're so entrenched that this is what we do, that this is all we can ever do. Like, I'm supposed to be I'm supposed to have a function, and anyone who doesn't have that, if you're not doing that, so they're so blinded by their oppression that they can't see beyond that. So they're all their mindsets are ingrained in that. Well, this is what we're supposed to be. They can't. The mixer there can't view himself as a bird who can fly around and do things, because he has no concept of that.
Because he's been domesticated. And then the same
in a different way that Dino
applies and the same lesson applies to marriage.
Yes, as we go through.
According to Mark Russell. By the way, huge shout out to the Nick Caveman shirt that Pebbles is wearing.
Okay, Pebbles, her shirt's great. One of the things to go through is
like, where's the merch? Shirts. I will buy them. Steve Pugh, put it out there for me. I would gladly buy a Nick Caveman shirt and wear it to a Nick Cave concert. And people would be like, where did you get this off-brand shirt? The billboard for agriculture. The food just pops right out of the ground.
Yeah.
That's capitalism selling a pre-existing natural service.
Yeah. This is, once we get into this marriage retreat, again, it's not real subtle in terms of what he's trying to say and what they're trying to get across. There was a panel here when they ask when Fred kind of breaks down what he thinks marriage is. I'm trying to see what page it is here. It's just him. Marriage is like life insurance, where he's talking about basically, and it is kind of a darker, kind of sadder view on what you think marriage might be. But then, as we go through, very similar to all of his other commentary, it starts by breaking it down and having a very dark view of what marriage might be. Only for at the end you get a sense of
and again,
of a
this
more
is
hopeful.
The distinction that I'll draw. He's attacking bad marriage.
Yeah.
This is like marriage for marriage's sake.
Yeah.
And marriage for the sake of conforming to a norm.
Yeah.
And what he does here is he inverts the norm and says, like, how would you defend monogamous marriage if that weren't the norm? It's easy to defend in our society where it's the norm because it's the norm. Norms don't need to be defended. They just exist.
Yeah.
And so he's putting it on the table, and this marriage retreat is absolutely insufferable. Like, it's just like, it's the type of thing where my wife would never make me go to something like this. But if the prospect of ever having to go to something like this existed, I would be on my best behavior absolutely all the time.
Yeah.
Because this like makes me want to vomit in my mouth with everything the leader of this says. And the jaded old couple, kind of a caricature, kind of a stereotype, but very real.
Yeah.
And then
then you have the brand new couple.
Fred is being equally dejected by the old cynical couple and the vomit-inducing like pep talk from the guy. And he says, marriage is like insurance. You only enter into a lifetime commitment because you're afraid of the future. But does being a married man mean she will love me forever? Or is it just my attempt to keep her from finding someone better? Is marriage really a sacred bond, or just the illusion of security? It reminds me of there's a really great song by my favorite artist, whose name is Father John Misty. And it's the end of Father John Misty is Mark Russell with a guitar. Because his name is Josh Tillman. He recorded like several folk albums. He used to be the drummer for Fleet Foxes. And then he recorded a few solo albums that didn't really go anywhere. So he created this fake persona of like the big shot guy and writes everything from that perspective. And he's like a fake hipster. But he wrote this song called Holy Shit. And the lyrics to the song are what he wrote on his wedding day. And like the second verse is age-old gender roles, infotainment capital, golden bows and Mercury, bohemian nightmare, Dust Bowl chic. This documentary's lost on me, satirical news, free energy, mobile lifestyle, loveless sex, independence, happiness, and no one ever knows the real you, and life is brief. So I've heard, but what's this atom bomb got to do with you and me? And so, Coliseum, families, the golden era of TV, eunuch sluts, consumer slaves arose by any other name. It's just beautiful, poetic prose, ripping all institutions and society to shreds. And then he just keeps coming back to like, but what we have is real. And like, that would be just an excellent soundtrack for this issue.
Definitely.
In the first verse, ancient holy wars, dead religions, Holocaust, new regimes, old ideas. That's now myth. That's now real. Original sin, genetic fate, revolution, spinning plates. It's important to stay informed. The commentary to comment on. And then he finally asks, love is just an institution based on human frailty, which is what Fred is saying here.
Exactly.
What's your paradise got to do with Adam and Eve? Maybe love is just an economy based on a resource scarcity. But what I fail to see is what that's got to do with you and me. Really, really beautiful song. I kept coming back to that, and I just adore that song, and really love, Fred's take here, because I think anyone who's honest will wrestle with those insecurities, but ultimately find hope in what they have.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And again, he's not presenting that as I don't think they're presenting that as, the kind of the end all be all of this is what marriage is. I think there's a reason why they give Fred that, because, Fred is, while he's our ostensible protagonist, he is seen as the guy who is just like wildly flawed. And so he's the guy who's always questioning things. He's presented as a guy who kind of messes up and screws up. So not that he's wrong about things, but by giving him, by putting that in his voice, I think you're meant to really think about it in the way of like, well, yeah, this is the everyman viewpoint. I think you're right about saying that it's if you're being really honest about it. That's the
Right.
fear. That's the, and so he's
Well, or
giving
even
voice
if
to
you
that.
think about it, and a lot of people don't think about it because, again, so many norms go unquestioned. And it's a question Fred has to ask himself because he's in a society where monogamy is not the norm.
Mhm.
For us, it's very easy to get away with never giving a critical thought
Yeah.
to, or at least for a very long time, not giving a thought to monogamous heterosexual marriage, which has been the cultural norm.
Yeah. Which is again, more things that they skew with this here, because it's not just about, when the town begins to rise up against the idea of monogamy, and they come after this retreat with again the things that with the signs we saw on the cover there, the same kind of things that they're going off to going off on this marriage retreat. The arguments they're making, everything they're saying about monogamous marriage between a man and a woman are all the same
arguments used
against same-sex marriage,
against whatever's not the norm.
Because it's the stuff that was said against same-sex marriage, that previously was said against interracial marriage, that it's the same it's the same argument over and over again. And again, it's one of the ones that the commentary is so very blatantly and obvious, to the point where he names the couple here Adam and Steve. Like, that's literally what they called it.
Turning the rhetoric on its head.
Exactly. This is one where he's not even trying to be subtle about it. It's so overt. He wants to make it over the top in a way to exaggerate the point of, like, look at how ridiculous this is. There are some things you want to. I think there's some things commentary you want to come at slyly. Maybe you want to come at from the side or whatever to be clever about it. And sometimes you need like a 2x4 across the face. And that's what this one is.
Well,
and to show the
issue uses 3 levels of it. So the marriage thing is the most blatant 2x4 across the face for domestication. Mid-level is kind of, the pet appliance beast distinction,
which we
subtle
we start seeing more of that in this issue. We start seeing the appliances talk to each other when the, like, in a very Toy Story-ish kind of way, people are gone, but there is a running thing that obviously all the appliances can speak to each other and they understand each other, but the humans don't understand any of that. But we start seeing some of that here, and that's like your level 2.
Yeah, and then level 3 is the public school system. And I love this conversation.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So what are they teaching you in school, Pebbles? How to sit still and shut up. Barney, with like just a gleeful look on his face, the skills that made me what I am today. And by the way, Pebbles is eating Fruity Pebbles. I don't know if you saw the cereal box.
Yes.
And then it cuts to Bedrock Middle School, home of the Fighting Tree people. Gonna call that out every time I see it.
Every time we see it, yep.
It's just solid gold. And again, they never put a spotlight on it. You have to study the panels to find all these little nuggets. But now Professor Sargon is in the classroom teaching. And so I think those are the 3 levels of domestication, and that public education is one of the ways of us domesticating or civilizing ourselves by creating and establishing and perpetuating norms. And again, you would have to be a fool to think like Mark Russell's against schools. It's like, no, I mean, I was going to say it's just a joke. It's not just a joke. It is a joke. There is some truth to it, but he's criticizing that reduction of school or a misuse of school. Rather than being for the sake of education, when school becomes about making good worker bees instead of making educated, enlightened minds. That's problematic.
And I think what it comes down to is, and what a lot of these issues start to have, is you have this kind of closing wrap up, and in that first issue with the art and the art critics and all that, it was Wilma, talking about what the meaning of that art was and why it was important. And here we get Fred's recollection of just the idea of what community was, what was the point of civilization, was a point of being part of this. It was the idea of this idea of kind of everyone helping each other. It didn't matter what it was, what institution it was, whether it was school or marriage or whatnot. It was the idea that this kind of holistic view of everybody helping each other, everybody pulling the same way, helping up the cliff and all that. And it's kind of like the Aesop fable at the end,
Right.
the moral, the lesson at the end that some of these issues have. And this one here was Fred's.
Yeah. God hates dads. It's just like there's just like I'd be so surprised if that picket sign was named in the script. I think that's some Steve Pugh innovation.
It could be. It's like,
by the way, the exercise of like them playing dead and talking to their spouses.
Yeah,
the cranky old couple. Where's the life insurance policy? I cut you out of my will, you old sand shark. And then the young in love couple, like, okay, pretend that Chris is dead. Oh my God, no. It's just so well done, showing both the cynical and the naive. And cynicism usually is meant to be a criticism of naivety. It's supposed to say like, oh, how simple of you to have this view. And so the old couple is an effective criticism of the newlyweds, but their criticism doesn't apply to Fred and Wilma.
No.
And that's the beauty of that.
Yeah.
So anyway, we then move to another great cover of Bedrock, the Vote. And guess what's on the chopping block this time?
Yeah. Worth noting.
Honestly, not nearly as cynical as it would be if you wrote this in 2022.
Well,
if people were questioning result elections and storming the mayor's office, it'd be a lot worse.
This was going to say this issue was released November 2nd, 2016. Right. Obviously they knew what the release schedule was. They knew what the solicitation was. It's like scheduling a holiday themed issue in December or whatnot. They knew this was coming out beginning of
it's genius timing.
Yeah.
And
genius timing.
I'll punch you in the beef. I mean, that would work. I'm sorry to say that would work.
It would, but it was genius timing that became just like horribly prescient, and
in both cases, you're following two elections, one, different scales, but you're following two elections, and both of them have a well-reasoned, thoughtful person against a big bully British person who's
a bully.
I'm a bully, but I won't bully you if you stand behind me. I'll protect you with my bullying. And and then in very I guess if you put the mind of like Karl Rove or Dick Cheney in the body of Dave Bautista, you have Claude, who is like not only being a bully and saying stand behind me, but also creating a distraction with the lizard people, saying like, here's your enemy and I'm the only one that's going to stand up to it. And, a few people were like, are they really our enemy? Like, what did they do that's so bad? And it's like the ferns. And meanwhile, Fred is contemplating his own participation in genocide in the Paleolithic War as, the war drum marches on with new victims in its sights with the lizard people. And by the way, I'm going to assume it's just something I forgot. Is Claude a character in the cartoon?
You know what? I don't remember if he was or not.
Okay. But either way, honestly, he could not have been that prominent, as like Slate and, obviously the two main families.
Yeah. And I don't think the cartoon had that much, kind of serialization to it where it would have really mattered. But if not, it's a great creation. It's a great creation or a great reinterpretation of a character.
But and a special shout out to Chris Chuckery in this one, because we do the flashbacks and the color palette changes.
It's a little
flashbacks.
It's a little more muted. It's a little
muted. Like a memory. It's faded a little bit.
And we also get what I'm thinking here. We get a change in the paneling as well. We have a black background. The panel borders are like they're rough. They're not solid straight lines, which is a great visual indicator that we're in the past. we're in a memory. It's a little fuzzy. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to get into all of the war and PTSD stuff, because that really reaches its pinnacle in the gravel pit later.
Yeah. Again, we just keep getting more and more information about that. We learn they're in the war, they're in a support group, they're veterans. We learn we learn how
PTSD. Fred how he got the PTSD. It wasn't actually from the killing itself. It was from finding the toy on the ground.
Yes.
And realizing he had been lied to about who this enemy was.
Exactly. Yeah.
They weren't planning an invasion.
They were just trying to live their lives. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was manipulated. Yeah. And I was misused, and I did horrible things.
It's one of those things that it's a through line that we get more and more. Yeah. It comes into a head at the end. But I guess really the important thing here is, in terms of story wise, like, it's why Bam Bam is so strong. Bam Bam is of the tree people, I guess. But yeah, the PTSD, all that
and
kind of trauma,
very Odin-like move, taking your enemy and its child and adopting. Which, by the way, was my favorite little nod in a very confusing and cluttered movie of Love and Thunder. But I loved that he adopted his enemy's child just like his dad did.
Yeah, that was nice little,
very nice little touch. And here we have Barney pulling a similar Thor move, and an Odin move.
Yeah.
But that ties the bond of empathy, I think, for Barney to say, like, I'm now connected to, the tree people, and I'm never again going to do something like
that. Yeah.
Sadly, it shouldn't take that, but at least they got there. And I remember there was like a bunch of things just in life I hadn't figured out by my mid-20s. And I was talking to kind of an older friend, mentor, and I was like, man, I really didn't figure out. I was actually a very poor student, basically all the way through undergrad. I really didn't hit my stride until grad school. And I was like, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this when I apply myself and try. And I was like, just beating myself up over like, man, I could have performed so much better in high school and college and all this other stuff. And my friend was like, look, it doesn't matter when you get there. It matters that you get there.
Mm-hmm.
And, and there's just no point in beating yourself up endlessly over the past, as long as you arrive in the place you're supposed to be in eventually. And I think that's where Fred and Barney kind of end up after this war.
I think so. Yeah.
And they're the two best characters in Bedrock. And that's no shade at like Wilma. It's just she just doesn't get the screen time.
She gets a bit of a spotlight a little later, but obviously it's Fred's story. It's Fred's story primarily. And I mean, even more so than Barney's story. It is Fred's story. Everything because we really only see Barney in relation to Fred. So Fred is right. is the main avatar, the main character. So but yeah, we see that throughout, and it even again continues on into the last arc here, the last issue of this arc, when we get to I don't know, what's the main theme of this last one here. We've gone through.
Well, I mean, and let me just say, I don't think they stuck the landing on the voting thing. They created 2 voting threads, but the Fred and Barney flashback stuff completely overshadowed the voting.
You know what? It really does. I think you're right about that. It really does.
And again, it doesn't make it a bad issue. It just means it's kind of false advertising on the front cover.
It does kind of end. This is one of those ones where, okay, we're talking about voting and democracy and all this stuff, and we're gonna hold a mirror up to this stuff here. We're gonna poke some holes in it, but we're not gonna go any real revelation to it now.
Yeah,
you're right. It is kind of left hanging because it is only half the issue. Because the stuff with the flashback stuff with the war is far more dominating, far more important. So yeah,
Yeah, and so I think
they'll circle back to it eventually a little bit, some of the end result of it, but the idea of voting, the idea of the democratic process does really seem like something that could have been really ripe for them to get in on.
But again, maybe it's like just too, it's addressed too many other places. It's too easy to find that criticism.
Maybe so.
And he wants to hone in on something else. For the final issue, my theme that I wrote down is everyone is awful. Civilization is pretending to be good people. That's the theme here. That like as soon as the timeline, as soon as you're given a stopwatch on civilization, it all comes crumbling down.
I wrote societal breakdown. That was that was my tour.
But there's like this Bedrockian exceptionalism, which is really a civilization exceptionalism.
Yes.
Like, oh, we're so evolved, we're so nice. But as soon as they think the world's ending, they revert immediately to the worst behavior imaginable. And let's just enjoy the not a full splash page here, but Panda Excess, Foot Liquor, Lithicore, Hammerstones.
We get some great store names, shop names. Yeah.
So anyway, just I never want to let Steve Pugh's work fall to the background. It's always worth shining a light. But here, and I think this is why at the end of volume 1, you still see this as primarily a cynical takedown piece of a book, because the fraudulent religion is ratcheted up to 100 here, and scientific arrogance is also ratcheted up to 100.
They both go they both go up at the same time. Absolutely.
Yeah, they both dive into their flaws head first, and we really see the problems. But we also, just as soon as things couldn't get more cynical, you start to get the relationship. I think this is the first time between the bowling ball and his friend, the is he
vacuum cleaner?
Vacuum cleaner. Or,
yeah,
I can't remember if they called him shop vac or something.
We get their meeting earlier, but
it's the touchest. It's the most touching story.
Yeah.
By the end of this.
Yeah.
And certainly the one that wrecks you later.
That page, their conversation there about what their day was like and all that stuff is like, it's a gut wrenching page. It is one of my favorite pages in recent comics. It's so good. I have it saved. It's one that I revisit because it's so incredible. We're talking about, an armadillo bowling ball and a little pink elephant vacuum. And it's like the deepest and like best friendship that permeates through this story. It's really, really incredible. And that's set against the absurdity of the humans, you know, and everything that goes on.
These two people who are both good and earnest, trying to have a real relationship, are just trampled by people who want the same things but do none of the right things to get them. It's hard to watch. But you also, so you get the scientist, first of all, laying off his PhD faculty in exchange for unpaid interns. Which is extremely tough beat. I have many friends with PhDs that struggle for work and are undervalued in their field even when they do get work. And so many millennial friends who take unpaid internships in every field, not just science, but, marketing, research, whatever. And they're like, oh, we're paying you an experience. It's like, but I'm living in New York City. It's really
but can't use experience to buy food.
Right. Or pay rent. Anyway, they start that. Then we get this comet projection from the end of the world. Amazingly, and I like this, that the end of the world prediction comes from the scientists, not from the religious group. The religious group has enough problems, but there's certainly plenty of false end of the world predictions from religion. I guess that was too on the nose. So he went for the scientist version of apocalypse.
But you still get the religious reaction, though.
You get the religious reaction, right? But it's not a religious cause.
No.
The end of the world, which is what we get a lot of ever since it became easy for anyone to publish a book. So anyway, we see society deteriorate. The rich guy wonders, what to do with all of his money and wealth and all of this stuff if he has no one to lord it over. Although it's not quite that on the nose, but it's not hidden.
Yeah.
And then you find that his abacus was failed from another experiment he was doing.
Yeah.
So it's a failure of technology, it's a failure of science, it's a failure of civilization and humanity. Everything crumbles, but then everything is kind of fine by the end, except we've had everyone's mask revealed. Like, we know what they'll do when the chips are down.
Yeah.
And that's where volume 1 ends, which is pretty bleak. I mean, now I think this was 12 consecutive months, right? This was not
yes, it was. Yes, it was. Yeah, no.
So this was not really the end of a story arc, but when you're buying it in collected formats,
yeah,
I think that's why I prefer the deluxe edition.
Yeah.
It's one 12-issue story. It's not 2 6-issue stories.
Yeah. Well, and then also
I was debating whether this should be 2 episodes of the podcast or not, because I was like, well, it's really one story arc.
Yeah.
But we're coming up on 2 hours for 6 issues.
Yeah.
It's such dense material.
Because there's so much there. Yeah. It also becomes clear again for when you get the next issue is a framing device of the Great Gazoo. So it feels like a soft reset of the story in terms of how we view it. So as you're reading it, you could see, oh, clearly this is like the start of something different here, even though it isn't really a different narrative storyline, because there is no real narrative storyline. But yeah, there's just they pack so much into these issues, into these comics, because it's not about specifically what happens. It's not really about following some storyline of the Flintstones. We're not really that the narrative isn't really important. It's all the things around it and what they're putting in, the meaning behind it and all of that. And I think that's what makes this book so interesting. And also one that I think people can always come back to, because it always has something to say. It's not like, oh, the story is going to feel tired and weird. The story doesn't matter. It's not about the vote for mayor. It's not about what marriage is. It's not about a meteor coming to destroy the world. It's about everything around those things. Those are just the setup. And so there's so much material there that I think it's easy to get lost in going in some of the tangents and directions that this book can take you if you're open to it. Because I think you said earlier, if you are disinclined to do that, you'll read this and it's be like, oh, it's ridiculous, and you push it aside. And instead of engaging with the material, and instead of allowing it to not change your mind, but allowing it, being open to look at things differently. If you just kind of shut it off and throw it away, then it becomes disposable to you. Then you're kind of the people that it's trying to skewer.
Right. Well, I mean, and here's the thing is you don't have to trade your belief for Mark Russell's belief.
No,
because Mark Russell's not putting anything forth for you to believe in.
He's trying to poke holes in everything.
Right.
Yeah. And if you feel
you can accept some criticism there, because he's not telling you what to think. He's just pointing out flaws with what you already think or what you may be guilty of.
And if you're someone who reads that and you feel bothered by that, you're like, well, that feels like it's directed at me. Your options are either examine why that is, or ignore it and put your head in the sand or something, Right. Those are the ways you can go. But yeah, he's simply trying to point out the things that, hey, this is kind of ridiculous, right? Or if we think about it, this is kind of dumb, right? Why do we do this? Why do we consider this? Why do we accept that? He's just trying to put things out there for folks to re-examine what they believe is true, what they trust in as being true. Because when you hold a mirror up to a lot of our societal institutions, they don't make a whole lot of sense. They don't hold a whole lot of water. So,
yeah. But even though this episode ends here, that's not where Mark Russell ends. That's not where we're going to end. We're going to end on a relatively upbeat note. I mean, especially compared to like Kill or Be Killed. Yeah. Which, I
think it's interesting this actually following Kill or Be Killed, because Kill or Be Killed obviously very, very cynical view of the world. Our character Dylan, was very, very kind of anti, he saw everything was wrong with the world. But in the end, there was this little bit of hope, like, well, listen, it's
life
not
is
so
better
bad.
than it seems in the moment. Yeah.
It's not so bad. It's not disingenuous, but it's definitely like, well, since I'm already dead, looking back on it, maybe it wasn't so bad. Here we build towards, I think, a different kind of hopeful ending, and the idea of that, yes, the world maybe has all these problems. It's maybe not the world is bad. It's like the world has a lot of problems, but you know what? I think we can fix it. I think we can do something about it. And I think that's ultimately where we get to at the end of 12 issues, not so much where we are at the end of 6 issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where we're gonna leave you this week. If you were like me, this took me much more than a week per trade to read. I know Alex is a binge reader, but I really had to chew on this. I had to reread a couple of issues to really absorb the art and everything. The great thing about our podcast, book club style, if it takes you 3 weeks to read the next 6 issues, take them. Listen to the podcast then, it's fine. But we will be back at you in 7 days with another one of these. In the meantime, you can talk to us, which people started to do on our website, storiedarcs.com. You can find us on Twitter, for now anyway, at Storied Arcs. You will never see us with a blue check mark. And you can technically find us on Facebook, but we don't really do anything over there. And on Instagram, we keep a pretty good presence when we remember, which is, again, Storied Arcs. So just remember, it's Storied with a D, Arcs. If you're listening to this, I assume you know. But, the other thing is, I'd really appreciate it if you share this with a friend. I've gotten a few new listeners lately, and all of them were referred. So the positive to me is that people are enjoying the podcast, they're enjoying the books we're choosing, and they're enjoying the comics themselves. But it's also a little defeating because it means all of my effort is mitigated because people will take someone else's recommendation, anyone other than my recommendation for listening to the podcast. So I don't know what else I can do, but we're going to be back here same time next Thursday. Look for us, and we'll see you for Flintstones Volume 2.
Peace.